Welcome back to another episode of the Packs What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perri Goldstein and joined by Bojack, if you just saw that tail in your camera. But we are back this week after a really just gross Packers loss to hopefully talk about a better matchup at Lambeau Field. Week 15, Packers hosting the Buccaneers. Perri, how are you doing on this early Thursday morning?
It's Friday Eve. We have a noon kickoff for the Packers this week, which I don't know about you, Maggie, but I could not be happier that this team is not playing in prime time this weekend. I think they are ready to not play in prime time this weekend. Just your average home game at Lambeau. So I'm feeling good. I'm hoping that they feel ready to bounce back from what was an absolutely embarrassing and abysmal loss.
I think one of my concerns, and we can just dive right into the offense here, is the injuries just like keep stacking and keep stacking. And it makes it feel like, each player that goes down, it's becoming more and more insurmountable. Like Aaron Jones, we're not sure what his status is going to be. Christian Watson has been a DNP so far, and it's early. Things could change by Sunday, but Dontavian Wicks getting hurt after, the really nice trajectory that he was on, making an impact. AJ Dillon on the injury report with a thumb as a DNP. So it just feels like the odds just keep stacking against the Packers. Jaden Reed said he'll be good to go for Sunday. Cleared concussion protocol, kind of missed that, which was nice, but did pop up with an ankle injury now. So it's just like this Packers offense cannot seem to get healthy to save itself.
They really can't. They cannot catch a break at all. There's a few of those that I'd be surprised if they didn't play. I love to hear that Jaden Reed is feeling like he's going to play. Now, I'm going to caveat this by saying Packers players tend to say that they're good, and then coaching staff decides nobody actually, you're not good and you're not playing. So I'm going to take that maybe with a grain of salt, but I do love to see that he's kind of like, he seems to be a dog. He's a bit of a fighter. I don't know how bad the AJ Dillon thumb is, but again, that's a guy who tends to power through. And quite frankly, if we have no AJ Dillon and no Aaron Jones, that is a bit of an issue coming into Sunday. So we can discuss what the run game looks like without the two top backs. But I'd be pretty surprised if AJ Dillon didn't end up playing on Sunday. It's a long DNP list, unfortunately. Dontavian Wicks did say his ankle was effed after the game. So likely the Packers will be without him, which I think low-key is a huge loss. He's been a security blanket for Jordan Love. He's been their middle of the field threat. He's been a pretty decent deep threat. So look, Matt LaFleur has put up some really beautiful games when his back's against the wall and his teams are without their best playmakers. However, going into a game where you pretty much just have maybe a Jaden Reed, a Tucker Kraft, a Josiah Deguara, Samori Toure, and Malik Heath, not great.
This is the Malik Heath breakout game. If you are trying to win your fantasy playoffs, you pick up Malik Heath on waivers, and
This is the Tucker Kraft stock owners going up right now, all right?
Speaking I picked him up in fantasy right before the Lions game when I said, like, everybody go get Tucker Kraft in one of my leagues, and then he caught that touchdown, and I was like, you're welcome. His stat line wasn't great the rest of the game, but at least he had a touchdown.
I have Tucker Kraft in both of my dynasty leagues because I have believed since day one that Tucker Kraft was going to be something, and it has taken, almost a full season, as it does for rookie tight ends. But, he has stepped up into that role quite nicely, and he seems to be a willing blocker and a willing pass catcher, which is everything Matt LaFleur could want. But, you don't want to go into a game and have your rookie third-round pick tight end be your top target, because that's not necessarily a recipe for success, even if you are playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are not necessarily lighting the world on fire, but are at the top of the NFC South right now and are currently a playoff team because of that. we remember this Buccaneers team as the team that beat the Packers in 2020 to make the Super Bowl, and they still have a lot of the same players on defense. They are a little bit of a shell of that version of that defense, but they still have those guys. They still have Anton Winfield Jr. They still have Carlton Davis. They still have Jamel Dean. They've got Shaq Barrett and Levante David, and they have Vita Vea, who, as you pointed out, is leading the team in sacks at the moment.
5.5 sacks
As their nose tackle. So they've got some dudes on that side of the ball. And as we watch Jordan get a little bit rattled by Wink Martindale again with the Giants, Todd Bowles is no slouch as well as a defensive coordinator. He's been around for quite some time, and I think he's going to be able to know what to do with a first-year starter and how to, knock Jordan off his spot. So this is going to be yet another week where, no, you are not going up against one of the top defenses in the league, and no, you're not going up against like a world beater, but you are going up against a defensive coordinator who's going to know what to throw at you as a first-year starter at quarterback.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we had talked about too, kind of going into this, was, you mentioned Winfield Jr. He's currently PFF's top graded safety in the league. The caveat there, of course, is that this also is a Bucs secondary that last week they gave up Desmond Ritter's career high in yardage. And so, there's opportunities there, I think, for Jordan Love to be successful against this Bucs defense. But there are some, significant pieces to keep an eye on. And Winfield Jr. is such a fun piece. Like, he's what you want your safety to be, right? He's already got 4 sacks on the season. He flies around. He's just about everywhere the ball is. So he's one of those players that, Jordan Love's going to have to account for anywhere he lines up, because he can really get after the ball. And I don't know how the Packers are going to game plan for this Bucs defense, but I think the run game just is what it is. We kind of say it week after week, right? Like, I don't think that all of a sudden we're going to see like 150 yards on the ground, or we're going to see like huge chunks of like 20-yard runs. I think the goal of this game just has to not be the self-inflicted penalties. You talked about it after the Giants game, right? A false start, it's all of a sudden 1st and 15. And once they get behind the sticks, it seems like they can't recover. So if you're just gaining 3-4 yards on the ground to set yourself up in second and manageable, third and manageable, I think that could be enough for the offense to sustain success.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's unfortunate because I thought last week was the week where like all you really needed to do was run the ball against the Giants, and that I think would have won the game. And I actually think that this is another week where you could potentially get the run game going against this Buccaneers defense, and that could be a little bit of like their Achilles heel. But unfortunately, you are once again like potentially out 2 of your top backs. So not that I don't have faith in Patrick Taylor, but if you're going into this game with Patrick Taylor and Kenyon Drake, I'm not feeling like particularly great about that as a game plan. And I'm going to say it. I actually would prefer this team put the ball in the hands of their quarterback to win the game, right? I do have like that at least level of faith in Jordan Love, even with some of his errant throws against the Giants. We mentioned some of the playmakers, and yet we failed to mention the one guy who Jordan Love seems to have the best connection with and who has had a bit of a quiet middle of the season, and that's Romeo Doubs.
Mm-hmm.
So in this loss of Christian Watson and this potentially loss of Dontavian Wicks and all the other people that we just mentioned, like, do you think that this is a game where we just see Love feed Doubs?
See, I kind of thought that would be the case against the Giants, and then that didn't happen. And so I don't really know. And maybe it's just who's kind of available in moments, because I still think Doubs is, he's a really good contested catch maker. He's come up in some really big moments, like the 4th down a couple of weeks ago to move the chains. And I mean, he had 4 receptions last week, but it was only for 32 yards, long of 14. So it's just not. His numbers are really interesting if you actually break them down game by game, because he always seems to have like a significant catch in a big moment to kind of move the chains and keep a drive alive. But he's probably averaging this really quick math, like 50 yards a game. So like he's not coming out and putting up like a ton of numbers. So I think if he does more of that, that would be fine. But I do think that somebody is going to have to step up, and you hope it's Christian Watson. Not sure if that can be the case with the hamstring, but when we talk about one of the things that gave this Bucs defense fits, it was the gigantic Drake London. He had, I think, 10 receptions for like 172 yards last week against that Bucs defense. And right now, the Packers don't really have that kind of prototype at wide receiver that can do that.
Yeah. Well, they have their tight end. I mean,
Right.
I guess that's my only thought there, is that if they would like to use Tucker Kraft, that's the body type at the moment that fits that mold. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I would like to see them use Romeo more in the way that they did in the beginning of the season, right? Because I felt like he was the top target at the beginning of the season, and Love seemed to go to him. And he still does, like you said, in those big moments. And if nothing else, he should be the red zone target. If the Packers get down into the end zone, especially with his ability to make contested catches, like I want them to be throwing 87 the ball when they're in the end zone.
And I think I really appreciate your point about putting the ball in Jordan Love's hands, because this is a Bucs defense that is better against the run than the pass. So if there's going to be opportunities to really kind of put this game away, I think it's going to have to come through the air, even though we mentioned guys like Winfield Jr. Jamel Dean is hurt. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to play. He's got an ankle injury. That's significant. He wasn't available for Atlanta. So they could be getting some guys back. Carlton Davis was a DNP with a groin injury. So, we'll see what the secondary looks like. But right now, the secondary is really banged up. And I think that's where we need to see Jordan Love get comfortable and capitalize. And I was a guest on Packers Nation. They have a show called Hot Cheese yesterday, and he asked me one of the keys to success. And I said, I just think that given the caliber of players on this Bucs offense that we can shift to in just a minute, the Packers offense is going to have to not settle for 3 in the red zone. I think they have to come away with more points, because I don't think field goals are going to be enough to keep them in the game. We saw what they needed to do against the Giants team that was averaging 13 points a game. The Bucs are putting up 20 points a game. Like, the caliber now has raised. And if the defense is going to struggle, your offense is going to be able to actually put up 6 and not have to kick.
Yeah. I think for the remainder of this season, how I feel about this offense, it needs to be aggressive. You need to be going for 7 at all times, right? And we went into this season, and I still feel this way, right? Is that playoffs were an extra. It was an added bonus if it ended up happening. But now that they're well within their grasp, it would be like fairly disappointing if it didn't end up happening. And I think the recipe for this is get aggressive. Like I said before, put the ball in your young quarterback's hands. Because again, if you're giving this, the teaching moment that it deserves, then you should be putting it on Jordan Love. And if he fails, then he fails, and he'll learn something from it. And this offense will learn something from it. And that's all well and good. And there's no, I think, con in going into the next stretch of games and saying, we're going to be aggressive on 4th down. We're going to be aggressive in the red zone. Like, we're going to run our offense, like run the Matt LaFleur offense, but be, aggressive in the play action and run what we run. But like you said, lean on the pass game, because again, aside from a couple of like not so great throws from Jordan, the last month and a half, he's been slinging it. Mm-hmm. So why not continue to like build that confidence from him and from this offense, with or without playmakers, doesn't matter. And like I said, I just think you get something out of it regardless. Lose, win, make the playoffs, don't. These are all like teachable moments. So go for it. Go for 7. Don't settle for 3. I'm with you there. Especially because this Packers defense is not playing up to like the standard of trusting that they're going to make stops. Mm-hmm. I'm laughing. So the fact that we're even sitting here at the end of the season in December and saying, I trust our offense to be scoring points over our defense making stops, is an absolute like incredible statement to be making. But I think it's where we're at this point.
And I mean, this is where it gets really tricky too. The Bucks are fourth in red zone defense. Like if there's one place that they shore up, it's in those final 20 yards. And I think the flip side of that is if the Packers go for it and they fail, you're still making Baker Mayfield work 90 yards to
Yeah.
score. You don't
Yeah.
want to give them a missed field goal and let them go 50 yards, 60 yards and put up points of their own. Like if you can make it hard and make them try to work 85-yard stretches, that benefits your defense as well. And of course, the asterisk here is it should have benefited the defense. They shouldn't have given up the chunk plays that they did against the Giants, but that's a wash at this point. So I completely agree with you that I think, for all we say about evaluation year ad nauseum with Jordan Love, this is what you want to see. Like you want to see him rise to the occasion. And I think he's done that. And I'm not making any excuses for his performance. We talked about it. I thought he looked kind of flat in the first half, but I didn't realize until I popped on the All 22 and saw some clips how insanely windy it was. Like I
Yes.
know that did not help in that environment.
I said this in the recap, and I hate to blame weather,
Mhm.
right? Because it's just is what it is. But again, like I live in New York, I was here. Like you can hear it howling,
Yeah.
you can see the gusts. And again, like these are the growing pains of someone who has never played. And when you have never played in weather like this, you don't know how to make adjustments. And it's all learning. But it's real. I think one of his interceptions was absolutely impacted, or his only interception, but was absolutely impacted by the wind. So it could potentially be why he felt so rattled, but he's going to play at Lambeau, right? He's going to have to learn how to play in those conditions. I'm not saying it's an excuse by any means, but the weather was very real.
Yeah.
We have talked now a little bit about the defense. So let's talk about Baker Mayfield, because before we started recording, we were laughing about how this Packers team just cannot get away from this quarterback because they've played him on the Rams, they've played him in Cleveland, and now they're playing him when he's on the Buccaneers. So this is a common quarterback opponent, even though he is on a third team. And the Packers defense has done well against Baker in their few outings against him. 5 interceptions, 10 sacks in those 2 games. They've beaten him both times. Baker tends to play mistake football. He's not a mistake-free quarterback. So a Packers team that has been woefully underperforming when it comes to turnovers has an opportunity to create some takeaways in this game. But Baker absolutely is surrounded by much better playmakers than in the last 2 outings that the Packers have seen him.
He's really surprised me this season because I agree, you kind of associate like living or dying. He always had like the Brett Favre gunslinger kind of attitude where like he could go down and win you a game with his toughness, but he would also throw like 7 picks in a game and you're like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" He's actually protected the football pretty well this season. 20 touchdowns and only 8 picks is for him, and looking at, some of his career numbers, it's pretty impressive. He's done a nice job, and I think one of the things you like about him as a quarterback is his mental toughness and his ability to pick up the tough yards. Like Tommy DeVito wasn't necessarily known for his legs going into the Giants game, and I think that's why it was so frustrating that the Packers weren't able to contain him. Baker Mayfield's not going to go out of bounds. Like this is one of those games where the Packers are going to have to tackle him or he's going to knock them over for a couple extra yards because that's just who he is as a football player. And I agree with you. Like you're looking at the weapons that he's got. Mike Evans it feels so weird that Mike Evans would be underrated, but I feel like he's never in the conversation as, one of the top receivers, and yet he's got another 10 touchdowns, 1,000 yards already this season. The Packers didn't have that against the Giants, and they still struggled against guys like Wan'Dale Robinson. So to have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, it's it's gonna be a really tough day for this secondary, and that's not even counting on the ground with Rashad White. So just I like the way that Baker is playing for the Bucks, and I think if you are talking about, you could argue the most experienced quarterback, probably Derek Carr would get that as far as being in the NFC South, but a team that or a quarterback that's taken his team to the playoffs when he was with Cleveland, I think the Bucks have one of the better shots to win the NFC South because of the makeup of their team down the stretch.
Definitely. I mean, there is definitely something to be said for having a team made up of vets. I mean, I said it before, like this is a team where their defense led them to a Super Bowl, not a few years back, right? So won a Super Bowl So Baker is a new quarterback, but Mike Evans is, I mean, you said it. I think he is criminally underrated, like one of the best wide receivers that we've seen, and just happens to have been on a team that, besides having Tom Brady for 2 seasons, hasn't won a lot. So I definitely don't underestimate him. And again, like, I don't know what's happening right now from an injury perspective to this team, but this is a game you want your star cornerback. Like, if you have something circled on the calendar, it's Ja versus Mike Evans. So we'll see. We're recording this on Thursday. We have not gotten the final injury report back. You got to play some like really serious, clean football against a Mike Evans. No Carrington Valentine, like oopsie DPIs, because Mike will win those 10 out of 10 times. I think your point about Baker actually playing a clean game is really apt, because if he does that, I mean, that's his Achilles heel, right? Same with like a Jameis Winston. When you get a Jameis Winston playing like turnover-free football, watch out, because they've got all the skills. That's always been kind of their one thing that loses them games. So if you don't turn the ball over against quarterbacks like them, you might lose. And the Packers have, like I said before, they are not creating turnovers well at all. And the stat line for when they win the turnover battle and when they don't win the turnover battle is night and day for when they win and when they lose. So they're going to have to create plays for themselves, this defense is. I don't know how, I don't know when, but whether it's a turnover like Keyshawn Nixon had in a really important moment against the Chiefs, whether it's finally getting to the quarterback and some rush lane integrity and getting some sacks against Baker at some key third downs, it has to be something. You just cannot let Baker do whatever he would like to do and play soft and take all the 5-yard gains that are in front of him and dink and dunk you down the field. You're going to lose this game if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, the Bucs are, it's, kind of cliche, right? I feel like this can apply to any team in the NFL, but they're 3-1 when they don't turn the ball over, and they're 0-4 when they have 2 or more turnovers. So obviously, you want to win that turnover battle. The Packers only have 6 interceptions all season, which just seems so insane. They're tied for 29th in the league in interceptions. And it's really hard to think about being a successful defense when you're not creating those opportunities. And we kind of talked about it when Matt LaFleur first took over, right? The 2019, 2020 defenses, when they could hang into games because they could kind of gift you some more opportunities for your offense to score points. When the Packers don't even have that to rely on the defensive side of the ball, it's kind of like we're talking about looking for an identity on this defense. Like, what do you hang your hat on? They're not getting home. They're not creating turnovers. Like, what is the thing that this defense is good at? And Baker Mayfield's not going to take the kind of sacks that you would expect Tommy DeVito to have taken. Obviously, he didn't against Green Bay, but he was only hit once last week. Mm-hmm. And so this is going to be a Packers pass rush that has to do something to get home, because otherwise, I think it's interesting too, they've got down the stretch, obviously, like Bryce Young, maybe Nick Mullins for the Vikings, we're not sure. But when you talk about like game-winning drives, the Packers had the opportunity to do that, and you don't expect a guy like Tommy DeVito to put a game-winning drive together. Baker led one against the Falcons. Like, he's been in those moments enough that you don't want to leave the ball in his hands. This needs to be a game that you're able to put away, because if he has time on the clock, he can absolutely use those weapons to get down the field and put the Bucs in a position to win a game.
Yeah. I'm almost hopeful that like the Packers play up to their competition this week. I just feel like they and I never like to say I don't like really believe in trap games. I don't think players believe in them either, but I almost feel like they do tend to play down to or up to whatever level of
Yeah.
their competition is at the moment. And it's just like maybe a young team issue. So I'm hopeful that they play up to the level of which this Bucs offense can play to. And quite frankly, again, their playmakers are going to need to go out and make plays. Like Rashawn Gary, you just got paid. Go out and play like the high paid edge rusher that you are. And if Ja does end up getting healthy enough to play, I fully expect you to go out and do your best to lock down Mike Evans. That's just like, someone in the comments on our recap show commented about how, we always blame the scheme and it's never about the players not making plays. And I want to comment on that comment because I disagree with you. I fully will say that like the players have not been making plays either. It's one thing to dislike Joe Barry's scheme, which we do, but also within that scheme, the players did not make enough plays to make a stop against Tommy DeVito and the Giants, and they're going to have to step up and make plays against Baker Mayfield and this Bucs team in order to win this game. Because as you said, they lose when they turn over the ball 2 or more times and Baker does not get hit. And so I think those are the keys, right? Take the ball away or at least force Baker to drive down the field, as you mentioned before, and hit Baker, hit him off his spot.
It'd be really nice to get Eric Stokes back for this one. I know he's been in that window, but it'd be fun to see what he's got. I know obviously he hasn't played at all this season, aside from the one game, but I think he might bring a little juice back to that secondary when he comes back.
How much do you think he plays though, if he
That's
gets
a good
elevated?
point.
Like, I feel like if Stokes gets elevated, it's like as a special teamer or as like a dime, which I'm fine with.
Dime could,
right?
yeah. I think honestly, one of the biggest pieces you want back is Quay Walker, and it seems at this point probably unlikely as a DNP. But I will say, I think I don't do grades, but if I had to give just the eye test, I really liked Isaiah McDuffie's performance against the Giants. We always think of him as like a core special teamer, but I think there's a world where McDuffie and Quay Walker are your inside linebackers next season. I could maybe see the Packers trying to move on from Devondre Campbell, but I just like what we've seen from Isaiah McDuffie. And does that mean I want him to be your every down Mike? Probably not. But I do like what he does when he's called up in spot duty. But I wanted to ask you this before we kind of wrap the show, because I've been thinking about it a lot. And I'm not saying losses are ever good, obviously. And the Giants game, I think, was one of the worst possible games to lose down this stretch based on the expectations. But Jacob and I were talking about leading up to that game, the expectations of this team now. It felt improbable that they were going to just go on a tear and win 8 straight and get into the playoffs. Like, do you think there's something to be said about them almost like the letdown that comes with a loss in a game you're supposed to win, where you can like shake it off, kind of take a deep breath, take a step back, and maybe reevaluate your perspective on things? Because I'm not saying the Packers expected to win out and run the table, even though Jair made the comment that they were going to. But like, what do you think about that? Do you think that maybe this was like the wake-up call that they needed, or do you think this is more of a warning sign about them playing down and performing as badly as they did?
I don't think this team needed a wake-up call. Like, they had gone on a terrible losing streak already this season.
True.
So they had plenty of wake-up calls. But I do think it's a very good lesson to remind, just like there's a lot of lessons. Like, I'm not in the locker room, so I don't know what the vibe is. But if you're vibing and thinking, oh, well, we're clearly the better team, so we're just going to go in and beat them and not take them seriously, then there's a lesson in that. Although Jordan Love had outwardly said, we take every single opponent seriously. So I doubt that that's that, and also like they're a 500 team. Like, let's be real.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's just a good, like, any given Sunday lesson, right? If you don't go out and play your best football, you're going to lose a game. It doesn't matter who the opponent is. And I think Matt said that too in his post-game presser. It's like, we played poorly in all 3 phases, so obviously we're going to lose. I love the idea of this team, though, being able to be like, well, that was bad. And now we have some juice and we have to go back out and show everyone that that's not actually who we are. Because I think that, we talk about identity, and you mentioned about the defense, but just holistically in terms of this team, they're still forming who they are. Mm-hmm. So is your identity a team that gets beat down by bad opponents and it lets it wreck you? Or do you get beat down by a bad opponent and you come back out with a vengeance? So far, they were able to overcome a 4-game losing streak and beat 3 very good teams, 2 playoff teams, 2 contenders. So my money is on them coming back out with a vengeance. Yeah. I think there's also something to be said for being young and just having kind of like a short memory. Like you don't really know what losing is like, and you're just like, well, on to the next. But it's different when there's expectations now. It's different when you have all eyes on you. It's different when you're not an underdog anymore, right? You go into those games against the Chiefs and against the Lions, and you're an underdog and you're playing with house money. Very, very different vibes than when you're going into these games and you're expected to win. Favored. When you're when you're favored, when you're being picked to win. Can you rise to those expectations and fulfill them as everybody's watching? All good. All things they need to learn how to do.
And Matt LaFleur said that, right? Like he said, one game at a time, like you're the hunted now. Like you are no longer hunting. You're the hunted. And kind of to wrap up with that, this is a Packers team still somehow in control of their own destiny in the playoffs. You would like them to win all 4? Possibly 3-1 will get them a spot, but really important games down the stretch for a Packers team that has aspirations of the postseason. But Perri, let's do score predictions really quick before we wrap the show. What are you feeling going into Sunday's noon kickoff?
Well, the Packers have to win this game. I think this is a little bit of a must win. I'm not going to call it a definite must win, but a soft must win. I'm going 24-21 Packers.
I keep going back and forth between 27-24 and 27-21, but I kind of feel like this is going to be one where the Packers are down late and this is going to be a comeback that they actually make. I picture it being 21-20. Jordan Love gets the ball in the final 2 minutes and they either kick a field goal or they come down and put up 7 to just put the game away. But I think the Packers are due for one where the offense just gets to march down and win the game. It's going to be nerve-wracking because we want them to be putting it away early, but yeah, I think the offense is going to be capable of sealing it. So yeah, I think the Packers are going to put up some good points in this one. I think they'll come back. So 27-ish feels good to me.
Love it. All
right. Well, hopefully we get a good game, like you said, back on the noon 1 p.m. for the Eastern listeners, noon kickoff instead of all these night games that have kept us up. But thank you, as always, for listening to the show. You can find us in audio format everywhere you find your favorite podcast. You can find us on YouTube. Make sure you download and subscribe and like and do all those things to help our viewership numbers. You can find the podcast on Twitter at PWSS Podcast, all other social media at Pax What She Said. You can find Perri on Twitter at Perri_Goldstein. You can find me on Twitter at Maggie J. Loney. We'll be back on Monday, hopefully recapping a Packers win as they secure their push into the postseason. But that is all we've got for today. So thank you, as always, for listening, and go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.